in law, not in political economy, from the University of Turin. I became interested in political economy because I followed the course of Claudio Napoleoni in 73-74. It was a basic course. 1/3 of what I know come from that course. So maybe because I don't know much, and that's a possibility, or because he was pretty good in doing this kind of things. It was a period in which he was trying to pursue a reconstruction of Marxian value theory, not only philosophically, but also, let us say, analytically. That is, the labor theory of value as a quantitative approach. This was not what he thought in the 60s, nor this was what he thought after 78. In a sense, that attempt ended in failure. It ended nowhere. But I am convinced that there was something good in that, though that failure had important reasons. One problem that Napoleoni had was that, like almost most Marxists, he was not really interested in money. This issue of money in Marx has been peripheral for a very long time, with some exceptions. And maybe the most important exceptions in the 60s was the book on money by Suzanne de Brunhoff. I was lucky enough to know personally Suzanne de Brunhoff. I became a friend of her in 1990. I was in contact before. Also because I was part of the seminar of Augusto Graziani in the early 80s, which was one of the founding experience of the circuit theory of money. Graziani never dealt with Marx explicitly except in 1983. You know that 1983 was a special year, and he wrote two surprising papers. What I'll try to do very, very quickly is giving you some flavor of what it is in the paper. You have to read the paper to understand the whole picture. I will begin with some Schumpeterian distinctions that he draws in the history of economic analysis about money. Then I will say something about the approach of Suzanne de Brunhoff on Marx on money. Two books of Suzanne de Brunhoff are translated in English, actually. One is Marx on money, and everybody usually quotes that book. But there is another one of 76 in French, which is on this state, money, state, capital state, and economic policy, which is pretty relevant, I think. Then if I have time, I will say a couple of words about a discussion she had with Lapo Berti and the theoretical journal related to the so-called operaismo, workerism, in the early 80s. And then I move to some point of Augusto Graziani about money as capital. And that, as you will see, there is even one case can say opposition between de Brunhoff and Graziani, even though both were respectful of each other. So let us begin with Schumpeter. Schumpeter distinguished real analysis from monetary analysis. Real analysis proceeds from the principle that all the essential phenomena of economic life are capable of being described in terms of goods and services. At the time, one would have said that this is neoclassical economic theory, but also Sraff as it was interpreted then, and one could go on. In this approach, money enters the picture only in the modest role of a technical device that has been adopted in order to facilitate transactions. Monetary analysis is completely different. Monetary analysis introduces the element of money on the very ground floor of our analytic structure. The essential features of the capitalist process may depend upon the veil, upon money, and the phase behind it is incomplete without money. It is not possible to begin with a barter economy model. The other distinction which is relevant is the distinction that Schumpeter used in the history of economic analysis about logic and history. This has to do with the distinction between metalism and, I don't know what is the right term, chartalism or cartalism, because both are actually used. The point of Schumpeter is that metalism, and then the reference to a commodity money, is logically untenable. The idea of metalism is the money essentially consists in a commodity or is backed by a commodity. And Marx has been interpreted along this line for a lot of time. According to Schumpeter, there is a confusion in this approach between the discussion on the historical origin of money and the nature or logic of money. Schumpeter was not an MMT theorist. He thought that actually commodity money existed in the past. Past systems were commodity money system. The point is that the natural logic of money is of a non-commodity money. So logically, you have to start from non-commodity money. He says, he writes, this type of error occurs very frequently in all fields of social analysis. Primitive forms of social institutions may be more complex than modern ones, and they may hide rather than reveal logical essentials. This is pretty similar to the position by Marx, by the way. The last distinction is the one between monetary theory of credit and credit theory of money. Schumpeter says the monetary theory of credit is the view according to which you start from legal tender money or commodity money, if you wish, as the only means of paying and lending, and build upon it the whole system of credits and debits. Everything that happens in the sphere of currency, credit, and banking is constructed from this basis, so to speak. The credit theory of money, again, is very different. The credit theory of money logically does not start from the coin or the convertible government paper in order to proceed to the credit transactions of reality. Schumpeter thinks that it may be more useful to start from the credit transactions of reality and then look upon capitalist finance as a clearing system. Actually, he wrote a treatise on money, which was published 20 years ago, which is exactly based on this idea. From this point of view, money comes later, so to speak. First credit, then money. Money pains comes as a special case without any particularly fundamental role than the monetary credit theory thinks. Marx on Money has been translated with the preface by Duncan Foley. It has been just reprinted in France 6 months ago with the preface by Cédric Durand and myself. I will not go into the details of Suzanne de Brunhoff. I just give you the flavor of some arguments or conclusions more than arguments by de Brunhoff. For de Brunhoff, a capitalist theory of money must be subsumed under a general theory, a theory in which money is grounded in a commodity exchange, a circulation of commodities, an exchange monetary system. Her view is a view in terms of a monetary theory of credit. She explicitly in 1967 says we need to have in Marx a monetary theory of credit. And the monetary theory of credit initially must be based on hoarding as a key moment. At the same time, she says that it is impossible to analyze real equilibria abstracting from money. So she has a monetary analysis in terms of Schumpeter and a monetary theory of credit in terms of Schumpeter. On one side, she is with Schumpeter. On the other side, she is against Schumpeter. Marx begins, and rightly so, from the simple commodity form, according to de Brunhoff, to deduce, let us say, the money form as the universal equivalent. The basic feature for de Brunhoff of Marx at the beginning, it is that there is a monetary ex post validation of immediately private labors, a position which is not far from the one, for example, by Michael Heinrich. Money, according to de Brunhoff, needs to be regulated, but the regulation of money supply, according to de Brunhoff, cannot be entirely political. The monetary policy is not omnipotent. The state power is genuine, but that power is subject to monetary constraints. The universal equivalent means that there is a unique form of wealth, initially the bullion, which, she's writing in 1967, comes to be particularly relevant in international payments and crises. The commodity money is sidestepped at every moment in the argument until the world crisis. The power of the state is real, but is also limited by the other states and the private individuals. But the monetary policy has an essential role in capitalism. The role of universal equivalent must be preserved as the money ground of the capitalist credit and international transactions. So this explains that Suzanne de Brunhoff is not sympathetic with Keynesianism, even though she had some points in which she used actually Keynes, especially the 1944 Keynes on world money. So I said there is a monetary theory of credit, but at the same time, in this monetary theory of credit, Suzanne de Brunhoff arrives to treat finance. And she stresses already in the book of 1967 that finance has the role to ante-validate capitalist production. So the immediately private labors needs to be ex post validated in exchange, but it is possible to have an ante-validation in monetary terms of capitalist production. This is in a circuit. The monetary capital must return in monetary forms. When finance comes into the argument, she says, we understand that theory must resist to temptations. Maybe that the term temptations shows that she thought that there were arguments, good arguments, to go either one way or the other. One temptation is to go towards a purely monetary analysis, which will make credit only a surface expression of an eternal monetary essence. The second is a purely financial analysis, which would examine credit solely in terms of the capitalist economy. There must be a monetary theory of a generalized exchange economy without capital, if you want to have a serious theory of money, because in capitalism, the money phenomena are related to this basis. As I said before, actually, the relevance of commodity money, at least in 1967, is due to the crisis. Marx wrote of the sudden change of the credit system that collapsed into a monetary system. Can monetary policy do something? Yes, it can do something, but it cannot do everything. No monetary policy can abolish the economic causes of financial stress. But there is a phrase of Schumpeter which is practically the same. The central bank is semi-private, but it is part of the state apparatus. Its room for maneuver is limited by the monetary base of the credit system that she discussed before. And the central bank must retain credibility of money as means of circulation. Ordering is needed for the survival of the monetary system. So Marx Capital, the book, is a theory of a monetary economy, no doubt about that, but it is not a monetary theory of the economy. Of course, the book was one of the first extended and most serious discussion of Marx theory of money, which has been neglected before. You have to go back to Luxemburg and Hilferding to have serious analysis, or in the meantime, less well-known authors like Karl Niebel, or a guy who taught here, Hans Neisser, for example, who knew about Marx. The book was reprinted in 71, then I think in 74, and after in 75 or 76. The third edition may be wrong that day. It may have been 75. Of course, they were years of turmoil. She had a post-phase in 71, and then another one in 75, I think. There was the collapse of Bretton Woods, and there was the great capitalist crisis, the so-called stagflation, with accelerated inflation. According to Suzanne de Brunhoff, there was a crisis management in this inflationary or stagflationary situation, but the point was to stress that this crisis management, as I said before, is not omnipotent, meets objective constraint. What is alive of Marx? It is the key role of the universal equivalent all over the theory. The problem of the realization of commodities and money, but also the way different forms of currency and money can be exchanged one with the other, or articulate the functions of standard price, means of exchange, store of value. The other key point of Marx, which must be defended, are what she called the two separations. The separations among the private producers, the capitalist firms, and the divide between production and consumption, the ex post validation. This was in the first post-phase that I said. In the second post-phase, the argument moves more to a discussion of inflation, actually. A prior financing, monetary financing, in credit terms, is an anticipation of validation. The ante-validation already in 67 becomes more strong as the key to understand what is going on. This ante-validation means that you actually sidestep the realization problem. It is as if commodities will for sure be sold. And when you move with a fully monetary financial economy, the relevant polarity is not so much commodity money, but credit money, the ability of credit of turning into money. Already in that post phase, she says that there has been two great changes in the 20th century, one in the 30s and the other in the 70s. In the 30s, central bank money nationally becomes inconvertible. And this gives the possibility that monetary policy, the ante-validation, becomes a pseudo-validation. Which has to do with the inflationary crisis, and so on. In 74, the accelerated inflation, plus the rise of unemployment, plus the financial crisis, according to Suzanne de Brunhoff, they came from the fact that the US hegemony was ending, the end of US hegemony. You know, for me, it is chronica, not at the time that what all of us thought. I matured the conviction that the ending of the US hegemony is the way the US hegemony is constantly reproduced, but maybe I am wrong. This end of US hegemony was related to the attempt to have a rapid increase in the rate of surplus value, and monetary policy, as economic policy in general, became part of a class reaction, a frontal attack against wage and employment. The book of 76 was not published by Les Éditions Sociales, who was the Communist Party publisher. She was communist, but it was probably too left, and it was refused. It was published because Althusser convinced Maspero to do that. I don't understand why it is not so much discussed. It is full of interesting things. It was written between 74 and 76, the same years in which the dissertation by Michel Alietta was discussed in Paris. Again, I can't go into the details. She is not an easy read. Her point is that the state's economic role is essential to understand capitalism. Exactly because the state, it is not endogenous and immanent to capital. But capital would not exist if the state does not manage the two special commodities, money and labor power. This has always been there. So this political element has always been there with capitalism. But there has been a change in the 20th century. And this change, according to her, is the birth of economic policy. For her, economic policy actually was created in 30s with New Deal, the management of employment, Keynesianism, etc. I think that she doesn't collapse, as too often economists do, Roosevelt and Keynes. These are the years in which she criticized Lapoberti, who in this journal, Primo Maggio, was a journal of the non-Negri style workerism, but also outside the Communist Party, were interested in money. Sergio Bologna discovered the articles of Marx on the New York Review. What is the name? New York something. And Lapoberti and other participants to this journal view economic policy as the embodiment of a clash between socialized labor on one side and the state as collective capitalism. So the stress was, with money as capital, monetary policy becomes directly political. According to Suzanne de Brunhoff, who was interested in the argument, this is, however, unconvincing. The limit is subjectivism because it denies the given objective social relationship. In this book, the forms of interventions are located within norms of regulation. She was discussing with Alietta clearly, and so the book of Alietta was in the making. The point she raised about against Lapoberti is partially personal for me because I was part of this journal some years later in the late 70s. And in my view, there were different positions in there. Some of us were exactly trying, in connection with Graziani, to have a connection between a truly monetary view with something which was rooted in Marxian value theory. Okay, in that book there are a lot of other things on which I don't insist because I don't have time, and move into this change in economic policy since the 30s. Since the 30s, there is a new type of state intervention. There are compromises and changes that the capitalist class couldn't enforce on its own. So there is the need of an external state. The New Deal comes in guaranteeing employment, guaranteeing the purchasing power of the workers, and now also with Keynes, the state is involved in the relation between the other two special commodities, money and labor power. The new system requires fundamental changes. The nominal wage becomes exogenous. The working class must be seen as an economic subject, even though controlled by the state. And this has to do evidently with the New Deal. What is the Wagner Law, something like that, I think. Then the reorganization of the state's financial apparatus, the redeemable currency on a national level. But she says in Keynesianism, the actual content of the demand from the state is irrelevant. State money income and state expenditure are like any other. This, of course, is directly opposite with what Hyman Minsky would think Keynesianism should have been. And I was lucky, and again, enough to know Minsky since 78, 79 in Bergamo. And a lot of things that later I said, at first I thought, oh, this is very original. Then I said, but maybe Minsky said this at lunch, but he didn't understand Minsky because he was completely a strange language. So I said, it's me that I don't know English or the US, he's from the Midwest. No, the wife told me after he died that his first language of Minsky was Yiddish. So maybe it was not only my problem. According to de Brunhoff, there must be always in a capitalist policy a dialectic between the social pseudo-validation in a Keynesian perspective, but the permanent existence of market-based constraints and sanctions. So she would probably not believe in all these books of very alternative economists that want, and social scientists that want to rethink capitalism. There are limits about that. About this state, already in 76, she had, according to me, the right position. The state does not disappear. The state needs to be there, but this does not mean that it needs to be there either as in the 19th century or as in the Keynesian experience. The state may change, take different forms, but capital always requires its existence. But the forms, the roles change very much. Personally, this is not here, but I have a particular analysis of neoliberalism. In my view, neoliberalism was not free market, was not the return of the free market, was a very policy-driven model, non-stagnationist, where the inclusion of households under finance was a means to create a quite dynamic economy. So the opposite that what is said. This required an intervention. So I would agree with Colin Crouch that defined that system as privatized Keynesianism. Actually, I invented by chance the terms before Colin Crouch. So it happened something strange. He wrote to me because somebody told him that I had used this term and he wanted to quote that. Okay, this I can skip. Probably the last interventions is with Foley in a book, I think edited by Arestis and Sawyer on alternative monetary theories, and it is on Marx and contemporary monetary theory and monetary policy. It is much more radical, of course, in the changes relatively to the 60s and 70s, but still the relevant insights of Marx are money as post-validating and the role in the commodification of labor power. That was already there at the beginning, so to speak. But now the stress is that the anti-quantity theory mechanism is the banking system, and that Marx's approach is defined as highly compatible with central banks supplying reserves endogenously, which is much more radical than at the beginning. About monetary policy, the idea is that money and monetary policy are the terrain of class struggle, which was the point of Lapo Berti, except that Lapo Berti and the journal went too much in that direction. I agree with her that you need to understand the objective constraints and that the crisis as relevant functions in capitalism. So she, with Foley, saw the accommodation versus inflation targeting as a contrast in which inflation targeting was actually a surplus value targeting. And she worked actually most of the time on international finance. So she was interested in the hierarchy of money and the struggles between big, great currencies. A few words, since I have 15, 20 minutes, on Augusto Graziani. This is Augusto Graziani. I did the dissertation on Rosa Luxemburg with Napoleone. From there, where to go? My interpretation of Rosa Luxemburg, the accumulation of capital, tried to find new ways relating that argument to the introduction of political economy on one side and the way she answered to the critics in the anti-critique. In the introduction to political economy, the argument was essentially related to a kind of Schumpeterian argument about relative surplus value extraction. She was antagonistic to the falling rate of profit, but she thought that there was a law, the tendential fall in relative wage. On the other side, when she had to respond the frankly quite annoying and male chauvinist attack on her book that she wrote in 4 months, thinking that it had no problem, some problem may have been there. Nevertheless, the point of Rosa Luxemburg was much more effective than the accumulation of capital, because she answered constructing a monetary circuit model with his own limits. So where to go? I went studying Schumpeter, and I became involved in the monetary circuit approach. And Graziani was founding the monetary circuit approach in Italy. Alain Pargues was doing the same in the same years in France. Bernard Schmidt was actually the first, probably, of reasoning in terms of the circuits in the 60s. For example, for those who know the guy, Jean Cartelier studied with Bernard Schmidt. The problem of Bernard Schmidt is first that he does not like to be, now he's dead, he's cool, and he himself does not like to be named circuitist, but quantum theory, this and that. Second, that probably he was the only one to understand himself, the way of writing, but that's another thing altogether. Graziani was the clearest of them all. In this article on money in '83, Money in Marx, he starts from the famous quote of Keynes, the distinction between a cooperative economy and the entrepreneur economy. Keynes said this bears some relation to a pregnant observation made by Karl Marx, though the subsequent use to which he put this observation was highly illogical. The cooperative economy is a case of CMC prime. The entrepreneur economy is MCM prime. The standpoint of the private consumer against the attitude of business. How Keynes relate this with the phrase in the general theory, according to which always and everywhere the aim of the economic process is consumption, is not to me to explain. Graziani developed this idea in terms of this circuit of money capital, which was a view taken by Wicksell in his Prices, Schumpeter, Keynes' treatise on money, not Keynes' the general theory. I have been there, for example, in San Diego in debates, Marxists, Keynesian circuitists, and some Marxists criticized this view, saying, oh, but Marx was not a circuit of money capital. Marx was a cycle of money capital. The point is that the term was in German for all these people. And it was the same, Kreislauf. So how you can divide the circuit from the cycle is not clear to me. Graziani says there are 2 keys relationship, social relationship. One is the relationship between firms in commodity circulation. It is the one on which there is the stress for Suzanne de Brunhoff. But the other is the capital relation, capital versus labor. According to Graziani, it is difficult to deal with money within one general theoretical framework. In capital, it is impossible to begin from money as a commodity, from commodity money. Their money is actually a pure credit, not bilateral credit, pure trilateral fashion. In the analysis of money under capitalism, you can find a place for commodity money, but in generalized exchange, at the end of the circuit, their money is the universal equivalent, but before being that, money is the means to realize social capitalist relations. As Hans Neisser here at the New School said, the point of money is to bring the access to the market, dividing the subjects in terms of power. I don't go into the detail. Graziani had a quite sophisticated, strangely, because he was not a philologist, discussion of money in Marx, in which he distinguishes Geld from Münze. Geld is money as abstract wealth. Münze is currency which may not be related to commodity. And you know, from this point of view, the point of Graziani was that Marx said, rightly so, that you, in the capitalist process, begins from a certain amount of abstract wealth to increase the certain amount of abstract wealth. But the form of that abstract wealth is changing. It may be currency, it may be commodities, and so on. His point was to distinguish in money finance from money as a stock of wealth. You know, behind this, there is also the polemic with what was monetary theory during Keynesianism, in neoclassical synthesis, and then monetarism and beyond. But I remember perfectly that in the early 80s, when we built the monetary circuit approach, our problem was not monetarism, neoclassical macro a la Lucas, or whatever. Our problem were the heterodox. Our view was that money was not really there in Sraffianism, in the Garegnani tradition, just to say. That was not in the Marxian tradition. For example, in Napoleon, was just a qualitative thing. It was there in de Brunhoff, but with the difference that I said. But then there were who? The US post-Keynesians. But for them, say Davidson, and partially also mostly Kregel, the point was the stress on money as stock of wealth, liquidity preference, and all that. But this is the picture of the economy in depression. Graziani wanted the essentiality of money, even in full employment, in determining the composition of production and the social relations. So he even wrote a paper called Moneta senza crisi, money without crisis. That was the test. The Cambridge post-Keynesians and Kalecki were good on distributions, but not very much developed from this monetary point of view, with one exception: 2 chapters in John Robinson's Accumulation of Capital. Then there is money as Marx saw it. Somebody wanted the discussion on volume 3. The point here about volume 3 in this essay by Graziani is that when Marx writes volume 3, the expression is there somewhere in the slide, Marx, didn't analyze a pure capitalist system. According to Graziani, you need to analyze a monetary system starting not from reality, realism. Today, everybody says at the heterodox, what is the methodological thing of the heterodox? Realism. No, no, no. It is abstraction. The point is the good abstraction to begin with. So Graziani, like Marx, he thought, yes, that the state is essential for capitalism to exist. But you have to start with the system with only firms, banks, and workers. That's not the word of the third volume. And Graziani says he is concerned with the practice of money markets. You know that those who study Marx philologically know that actually those chapters, volume 3, were constructed by Engels by a lot of material which was in some folders, the title of which was Confusion, where material constructed together. At the level of abstraction, which is not very high in volume 3, Marx looks at the functions of money in an open economy with the state. And there a lot of things matters, and rightly so. He says also something about the crisis, Graziani, in that paper. He says that for Marx, the sequence of exchanges may be broken. When you have money, the buying is separated from, may be separated from the selling may be separated from the buying. Of course, not in the meaning that the same transaction is, of course, buying and selling, but you can sell without necessarily buying immediately. So why? Well, Keynesians will say liquidity preference, which comes from uncertainty. And then demand declines also because there is a stock of wealth. Graziani does not disagree with this, but he says, look, uncertainty is not like Keynesians or true Keynesians love to say, something which comes from the human being in general. It is the social situation of capitalism with technical change, class struggle, etc., which gives reasons for uncertainty in the social structure. So he says you can look at the crisis from 3 points of view. The point of view of Keynes, the point of view of the monetary circuitists, the French monetary circuitists, if you wish, and the point of view of Marx. The French monetary circuitists, the pure monetary circuitists, were much more radical than Graziani. Graziani always tried to let the models somehow communicate. They would say, no, liquidity preference is something which is not sensible and whatever. What is the crisis? The crisis happens at the beginning of the circuit. It is the decisions of the firms or of the banks not to begin a new cycle of accumulation. So for them, the crisis is a failure to open the circuit. For Keynes' general theory, says Graziani, there is a constant money supply. Liquidity preference makes go up the stock of money as liquid balances. Some firms do not recover the outlays. There is the failure of the circuit to close. Marx's argument, as I presented through Graziani before, is the idea that there is a break in the circuit. And Graziani says both views may be put together. This is the last slide, so I have 6 minutes, I think. Okay. This is more me, and this would mean a lot of time because I'm not able to be synthetic, but not because, but I would say that Marx is not just a monetary theory of value, but a monetary labor theory of value. You know that the term monetary theory of value is very famous nowadays in the last year. It is the idea of Michael Heinrich, but there is an old German tradition with that. And it is a tradition that does not like to have labor in it. They would even say that the labor theory of value is not Marx theory of value, but it was a monetary theory of value. And the theory of value is a theory of social domination and not a theory of exploitation. I think, and here, having studied with Napoleon as a role, partially, I think I went beyond that. My idea was that, in fact, the value theory of Marx requires that you have an argument according to which the value added created in the period exhibits in money nothing but labor. This is not something that, as most Marxists say, no, you don't have to argue about this. You need an argument, and Marx looked for an argument, and in my view, he had two, actually. This argument is exactly an argument which puts together money, value, and labor. You can't cut one of this. This is at the beginning of Capital Volume 1. But when you arrive at Section 7 of Capital Volume 1, this monetary labor theory of value starts to look very much as a monetary theory of capitalist production that, in my view, could be put in relationship with the heterodox monetary tradition, Wicksell, Schumpeter, and others. It is a macro class monetary approach. Then one says, oh, but it is mostly use the terms macro monetary approach. No, it is quite different. It is quite different because it is in terms of a division in class, and my argument would go from the first book to the third, not from the third to the one. It is reading volume 1 from the third volume. I should go into details, and I don't have the time to do this. My perspectives would say that Marx certainly would side with monetary analysis. He was ambiguous between monetary theory of credit and credit theory of money. I think that both de Brunhoff and Graziani, in terms of interpretation, have their reasons. I think, however, that we are forced to go beyond Marx, which means to go against Marx. We cannot be satisfied of interpreting Marx. We need to reconstruct Marx in dialogue with the non-Marxian or non-Marxist political analysis. So my suggestion, my attempt has been to rewrite, reconstruct Marx within the credit theory of money. This does not mean that money as a commodity is irrelevant. But of course, you cannot simply take Marx as it was and apply it today. I think I can stop here. 1 minute in advance.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? All right. My name is Spencer. I'm a PhD student in economics here at the New School. I will be the student discussant tonight. So first of all, Professor Bellofiore, thank you for coming and thank you for that talk. I would like to focus first on the ending point you made about reading with Marx and against Marx in the context of the best of credit theories of money. And I would like to kind of bring up two ways of approaching this, one that takes us away from orthodoxy and one that actually in a way kind of brings us back to orthodoxy. So the way away from orthodoxy, you brought up Hyman Minsky in your talk, and as, for example, Professor Jan Kregel has mentioned many times here at the New School where he's been teaching the past few years, Minsky had viewed the theory of liquidity preference in Keynes as a theory of asset prices. So the first question is, how can this way of viewing financial markets and cash flows be a way to build on Marx's insights? Where are the connections, or are these projects fundamentally dissimilar? My other question is the one that brings us back to orthodoxy, the question of the commodity theory of money. And in your paper, you rightfully point out this tension between Graziani and de Brunhoff, that despite their many similarities, de Brunhoff ends up with a monetary theory of credit, and Graziani ends with a credit theory of money. However, both of them locate something special about labor power in the context of the credit system and the banking system. In your paper, you mentioned how de Brunhoff focuses on the state as managing the purchasing power of labor power in her 1976 book. And of course, Graziani, in his monetary circuit, has the wage bill as the essential form of credit money flows in between classes. So this raises the question of what is the status of labor power as an asset, as an implicit asset within the credit system? In a way, is there an implicit commodity money in the form of labor power in these two approaches? And is this an opportunity for Marx's theory of commodity money to, in a way, ironically be preserved at the level of credit monies as opposed to moved aside? So thank you. Those are my two questions.
What do we do? We collect some questions. It's a huge question. It's a series of it's a huge question. It's a set of questions. First, an explanation of the distinction between heretic and heterodox. I became annoyed of the repetition of the term heterodox. One reason is that we are in a world in which you have to be original. We are in a world in which we have to be original, so good to have this kind of things. And when I started to say heretic instead of heterodox, I said, oh, that is an original idea. Then I went to the collection of books on monetary theory that in the group of Graziani, when the group started to meet, we became a group translating classics in monetary theory with our introductions. And in the presentation, he did exactly the distinction between heretic and heterodox. What did he mean? What did he mean? My meaning is the following. The heterodox is somebody who is within some kind of church and is against these tenets of faith. But the thing stays there. His request is to be accepted, that there is a voice also for them. I started in the late 70s, early 80s, in which there was an attempt, I don't know if you were ever at the Trieste conference, of having a meeting point of post-Keynesians and, let us say, ruffians of many. At first, one thought that these ruffians were one church. Then I discovered there were many churches, not always well seeing each other. They started in 79, 80 as friends. They ended killing each other. Now, everything is changed, and one attempt to say, oh, we are all friends, so we can do conferences in which you have me and 10 different people of heterodox approaches. Each one comes with his own commodity to sell. It's very rare that there are discussions, and nobody cares of what the other says. Just we need to have hearing, and the students need to hear our voice. Was Marx a pluralist? Was Schumpeter a pluralist? Was Keynes a pluralist? Not at all. They were heretic. Heretic from Riccardo, heretic from Varras or Bembauer, heretic from Marshall. They wanted to be the new religion, including the past religion as a special case. This means to be heretic for me. So I like the game orthodoxy, heterodoxy, because I could put it in that kind of framework. And I would given so far as to say that I don't like to be called Marxist anymore. I prefer to be called Marxian because I am heretic. At the same time, I would say that I am an orthodox. Simply, I am a creative orthodox. What Marx did in his time, the critique of political economy, the critique of capital, but the critique of the political economy of his time, and the critique of capital of his time. From my point of view, Marx was not true when he said that 1830 political economy died. No, there has been a development in bourgeois political economy, and you have to learn from them. I quoted Wicksell, Schumpeter, but the argument may be extended. And the point is, are we living in capitalism? Yes. It is the same capitalism than Marx? No. I would even go to say that we live in a situation in which there is a centralization of capital, but not a concentration of capital. I don't know why in the US, the sociologists use the opposite term. There is Bennett, Harrison, and I should go into the argument about that. But that's a great change. We are in a situation in which there is an immediate socialization of labor. Marx thought that capital to produce surplus value had to dominate workers, but to do them, they had to put workers in connection with one another. We live in a world in which it seems, or it appears, we have to understand, that actually there is capital can put together the workers and they be isolated, can launch, has done wonderful movies about this. So we need to do a critique of the capital of today. And Marx would be the first to do that. He never left alone one page on value that he wrote. Every time he rewrote it. I agree that we have to go away and we have to, in a sense, go back. The relationship with young Kregel has always been good, as well as with Minsky. But of course, Kregel would insist that in the circuit, and this is partly true, there is a downplaying of the stock exchange markets, all this phenomenon. And when I had to write about contemporary capitalism, maybe I used the term financial, real subsumption of labor to finance, I had to go beyond Graziani, because Graziani actually stopped early 90s in writing about this stuff. So that model is incomplete. And my point is that actually it is not really a model. It is a good accounting of a monetary economy. So you can't disagree with that, whatever your ideas, but you have to be theoretically coherent with that. Graziani is famous because of his writing internationally on the circuit. But his vision was much more larger and Schumpeterian, and in the 60s, even analytically, he was much more developed. He was looking to a disaggregated economy moving out of equilibrium in a disaggregated fashion. In the 70s, what he had, the fact that the macro, even the one that he liked, had a hole, the treatment of money. Money was not there. So he's continued writing on the real economy with that other vision, but analytically he worked with that. And there the point is money is a means of power. And this is underplayed by the true Keynesians, even, I mean, power between social classes and inside the capitalist class, the various fractions. So the interest for Schumpeter, for example, there is all this discussion about inflation, very often because of the household or workers and capital. But the intriguing thing of Schumpeter was that inflation was changing the cards for the fractions of capital, or the interest of what changed between financial capital and industrial capital. Here, Minsky was an ally, so to speak, because Minsky came from indirectly from Marx, and from that Schumpeter, and the Schumpeter related to Marx, and Minsky knew that quite well. And probably you know that Minsky was a socialist, was not a Leninist, he was not a communist. Also because when he was in the high school, the Leninists took the students with him, so he was sidestepped. He voted outside of the two parties. He was very radical. At the same time, I think that there are two Minskys. In my Bergamo, Piero Ferri was the professor with whom I came to Bergamo, late 70s. He was attracted to the Minsky of the 50s on the cycle, the writings of the cycle, and tried to have some link with the Minsky of the financial instability hypothesis. Unfortunately, we are recorded. Piero didn't know much about this dimension. But the point is not that. The point is that there is another Minsky, the Minsky that comes from the New Deal, the Minsky that is interested in labor, the Minsky that is interested in an economic policy which intervenes on the composition of output, the Minsky that at the end of the John Maynard Keynes book, in the last two chapters, criticized Keynes from the left, telling that the socialization of investment is unacceptable in the terms of Keynes. These are two Minsky to be put together. And the Minsky of the financial instability hypothesis is very intriguing, but it's wrong. Here I would side with the Kaleskian and with the circuitist, because the point of that Minsky is that 1975, when he didn't know actually Kaleski, that the individual firms have a will to over-indebt and transpose this to the macro level. But if all firms over-invest, the profits becomes deposits from investment, because be sure about that. Investments comes before profits. In my view, also in a Marx. If you do this, at that point, you don't have, you may be willing to be over-indebted, but in the end, everything is covered, everything is edged. So here I would do the magician, and I would say, oh yes, because the financial stability hypothesis for Minsky, what was the tendency of the rate of profit to fall for Marx? It's a tendency which is always there, even though 95% of the time the counter tendencies win. So the problem is to understand what is happening in the process. So I am not a Minskian of the financial stability hypothesis, which could be related, and by some has been related to intelligently to Marx. Say Crotti, for example, is one who does that. I think that is much more interesting, the other one on labor, etc., and the Minsky who goes to present a stage view of capitalism. And he does that in relation with Schumpeter since the early 80s. That's the interesting thing from a Marxian point of view. Minsky does this with the different historical configuration of finance. I would say that this must be related with the historical configuration of labor and capital in time. There is a lot which is interesting, the liquidity preference and asset prices. I just start from another point. Your main point is when you say you go to the commodity of money. When you told me this in Berlin, I said, what a funny thing to say. The way you presented here, it's quite different, and I would even dare to say that I may agree. Labor power. This time I took this directly from the point of view of Graziani. It would be long, but in the 70s, when I studied in France and in Italy, there was this stress, including Napoleoni, of value theory as the indirect exposed validation on the market. The same with the people who worked with de Brunhoff on value theory. For example, Benetti and Cartellier, who at the time in the 70s were Marxists. Now, if you reason in that way, and I am the last of the Mohicans, so I still reason, you see that Marx was trying to say two things at the same time. First, where value actually comes into existence in the conjunction of production and circulation, a position which is not far from Michael Heinz. But at the same time, Marx, in the first three chapters even, is saying, but this that happens there, it is the result of the movement from the inner to the outer. As I see it, the inner is not just production. It is the capital relation, which includes the circulation moment, which is the buying and selling of labor power. So you have a bridge towards the circuitist view read in a Marxian in a Marxian way. How could Marx think in this very strange way? Because he has a commodity money view. This is what I think Heinrich and all the others do not see. Because they say, oh yes, Marx said that because at the time there was commodity money. No. The point had to do, in my view, exactly with value theory, not with monetary theory. Because if, as Marx thought, gold, when becomes money and enters the circuit, gold as a given value, the capital, monetary capital advanced before the final exchange as a value in labor hours, and the commodity which is produced as a price tag, which is monetary, and as a value in labor hours. So, yes, of course, I should develop this, but you can say that you are seeing the process before the final conjunction, etc. I'm finishing. You close with finishing. Yes, that's why I told before. Why don't we have the question? Then at this point, what Marx is is telling is no, what we have to do. We cut away money as a commodity, this argument collapses. You have production, which is non-social, concrete, and circulation, which is social. For me, this is a disaster. What Graziani did, what you said, Graziani said, okay, the finance at the class level goes to buy through the money wage the workers. But the money wage is regulated by in real terms. So it has a value content. So the money capital advanced in itself is not a value content, but indirectly has a value content. So in Graziani, at least, and in the way I try to develop, there is a connection. You want to call this a commodity theory of money? Okay. The point is that this is not the commodity theory of money as we all loved in the first two chapters, which are wonderful. They are full of things that we must take back, but not in that form.
Should I ask one or two questions? Okay, all together. Okay, so thank you very much for the presentation. I'm Yannis Bouyatiotis. I'm a second PhD student here in the economics department. So the first question has to do with an exchange that I had over the summer with Fred Mosley. So he was giving a presentation, very polemic, of course, to Michael Heinrich, which I'm also sympathetic to the critique to Michael Heinrich, just to be clear. And one of the points that I raised with him and that I found interesting is how much he drew from Rubin. And the strange thing is that Heinrich also draws from Rubin. So I would like to also extend this kind of question and this kind of problematization, or when Rubin is located in your work, in conjunction, if you want, with these other authors. And the second question, you might skip the second question. One of the main lacunas of the theory of money in Marx's, the Marx theory of money, as at least I see it, is the question of world money. And particularly now, which is a kind of a crucial moment in asking these questions. So I would like if you could at least speak a bit what's your approach on world money and how this is, whether there is a theory of world money or whether functionalists account that dollar is the de facto world money are sufficient from a Marxist point of view. So these are the two questions. Thank you.
Again, thank you very much. I'm actually doing my PhD in philosophy, so I approach a slightly different standpoint. But I was very interested in your point that we should not condemn the bourgeois economic thought after Marx's time as totally unscientific. On the other hand, you also mentioned Louis Althusser, and in conjunction with de Brunhoff's publication. And Althusser has the concept of the problématique, the underlying set of theoretical presuppositions which guides someone working in a field of what you might call social science. And if we are going to say that Arrow and Debreu's general equilibrium theory is one of the summits of bourgeois thought, which I proposition that I'd endorse with emphasis on the word bourgeois, nevertheless, what is involved in integrating that depth of theoretical commitment into a Marxian structure, bearing in mind the presuppositions that are so different from what a Marxist would bring to the table?
Hello, thank you very much for that insightful talk. Jan Hendricks, second year PhD student here in the Econ department. My question is relatively short and it's kind of pertaining to the issue of commodity, money, and the relation between the monetary moment and production and so on. And I was just wondering what you make of the kind of solution that was proposed by Andrea Ricci, who said that money has to be a commodity, but it just has to be a commodity in general, which doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be a capitalistically produced commodity, where he says that gold, in the way it's mined and so on, that's a capitalistically produced commodity, but Marx only says that the money commodity has to be a commodity in general. It doesn't have to be one that's produced capitalistically.
This is a question from the Zoom from Ronald Calitri. Ronald Calitri on Zoom. In a way, does the dollar remain hegemonic because it fulfills the unit of account and the store of value? In the criminal world, quote unquote, Benjamins are the real crypto, and the criminals behind politicians will never give up their paper molten gold.
There are questions. We can do another round. This is for those who do not read German. I was pleased by the book by Michael Heinrich, not the books translated in English that I know, but the German, who is the real book. His dissertation of 1991, second edition 1990. And I'm pleased also because in the US I understood that you have to say that everything is cool, awesome, wonderful. I would add fantastic if you don't use very much, etc. Well, it is a great, and I appreciate it because the problems I understand from the tradition I was built in, that those were the problems that signed, in a sense, the end of certain approaches. However, the difficulties for us. And it is full of things on which I actually agree. So I insisted on the differences. But for those who are not German and are able to read in Italian, we translated it. And actually, I don't know when the English translation will appear. I would guess that the French translation will appear before than the English. And we are good friends. In a sense, I see him as a brother because he, not the fan club of Eric, but he is very open-minded, nice guy, wonderful. I have a quite long introduction in Italian, which is now translated in English. So if everybody wants to read it, it's up to you. One of the points I raised is about Rubin. I am much more Rubinian than he is. I think that Rubin, like Marx, like all this old tradition, actually ends in nothing because in the end they have commodity money or money as a commodity. I prefer money as a commodity, though it's an ambiguous terminology, because I want to distinguish the commodity money in Marx from the commodity money in Riccardo. They are quite two different things. But if you want to reconstruct value theory, Rubin, together with Napoleon and a few others, but more in a sense than Napoleon, is the right place to start. Hayek is very dismissive. And I think because he actually didn't read Rubin well, because in Rubin, exactly between the second and the third edition, not in the second edition, but between the second and the third edition, he moved from a almost fully circulationist view, to be quite rude and partially inappropriate, to a view that tries, as I said, to say that the abstract labor is a process which is constituted in production also quantitatively and arrives to the end. So on that, I completely agree, if I understood your question. It is true that there is this problem of the world money. It was raised again also in the last question. In the way it was posed in the last question, I am not sure I'm able to answer. If not for these few words, Marx has a view of world money. This view of world money is exactly the view that at a certain point at the world level, there is a crisis, and in this crisis, you have to go back to the commodity money. I don't want to be too provocative, but one could put this argument in a way similar to Ludwig von Mises' view of crisis. It's a good theory. I think it is a possibility that goes that way, but not necessarily. In a fully monetary economy, you would have a world money. Take Keynes 1944. De Brunhoff, that's interesting, in 1996, and I agreed with her, she proposed for Europe not to maintain the national currencies, not to have the euro, but to have a system like the 1944 Keynes system. And according to Marc Lavoie, what was put up through the target system was actually not too far in practice from that. So in that case, you have a world money, which is the money of the central banks. It is not a circulating money. But this does not happen, and does not happen for a reason, in my view. If you don't have that world money, take the perspective of the circuit theory. What do you have in the world system level? You have monetary systems which are connected one to another in a world system which is not monetary. Because how you deal with the imbalances? Either through commodity money, you give gold, or through reciprocal extension of the debt, which usually goes together with a political price. It's difficult that somebody accept not to be paid just for that. But this means that the collapse into money commodity is not necessary. You could have the extension of credit. What actually happens is the series of hegemonic phases which are interrupted by crisis. And this is what happened in the past. What is going on today, I don't know, but I would say that here we should look at the world level of the way money is injected in the system. And since 2010, 2012, and onwards, the point was it is called the swap system. So when I wrote the book about Europe and it was presented, a nice friend of mine, she criticized me because there was not the word imperialism in the book. I said, oh, but there is reference to this. If you want to know one of the ways the dominance of the US is maintained, is dead. But really, I have no answer about that. Now, the philosopher, you have the real science, which is the Wissenschaft, not our science. There are two things. I begin with Arrow de Bro and then go back to the problematic. I think that we live since 40, 50 years with two mainstreams. I don't think there is one mainstream. I have to be very, very drastic. So I would say the Barrasian and the non-Barrasian. Arrow de Breu are in the non-Barrasian, are what I would say imperfectionist. So I would say that the Barrasian plus the most anti-Barrasian of them all, the Austrians, are the basis of what I would call neoliberalism. The imperfectionists are the basis of what I would call the economic policies of the social liberals. The social liberals for me are not just neoliberals who are not so bastard like say that I don't know the neoliberals. They are a completely different thing. They want more market than the neoliberal, more market, not less. But they have a good heart, so they don't like precarization. But flexibility of labor is okay. So one should go into that. Arrow de Bro could be in that direction. I would put them into the economics box. Because we are in economics department, but when I was studying, we knew that there was economics, political economy, and critical political economy, maybe critical political economy. Economics is vulgar political economy in terms of Marx. Political economy is Raffians, is Keynesians, is another thing. You have to learn, Marx would have said, from political economy. But if you read Marx, you understand that he wanted to learn also from the vulgar economist. He hated Malthus, but he used Malthus. Bailey was a vulgar economist. Crucial to understand Marx. About the problematic, I'm happy that you used the French term because collecting these articles on Michael Heinrich, I see that everybody translate it as problematic in English. But problematic in English to me means a different thing altogether. And I don't think that there is a translation in English for problematic. Let's create, I cannot go into that. I just say that I'm not an Althusserian. I have respect from Althusser. I am much influenced from a few Althusserian philosophers of science, especially one, who is Val Suchting. Val Suchting is not quoted anymore. He was an expert of Hegel, actually. Not an Hegelian, but a true expert of Hegel. My philosophy is much more influenced by the Frankfurt school of my years. I'm old. High school, late 70s, late 60s. Beginning of the 70s. So that's my thing. More than Adorno and Horkheimer, good read, guys, and like, yes, Backhaus and Reichert, but the great hero of mine is Alfred Schmidt. I suggest to read and reread the concept of nature. That to me is much better than the present day, how to call it, green Marxism, something like that. Andrea Ricci, I am a friend of Andrea Ricci. I am not sure that I understand his argument. At the more abstract level, the argument would be that a capitalistic monetary economy, and the true monetary economy from the point of view of Graziani is capitalistic, cannot be based on any kind of money as a commodity. Because if money as a commodity is produced capitalistically, this production must be financed. And how it has been financed? You go back. You can say, oh no, it is a commodity produced before the capital began. Again, Ludwig von Mises. That's his argument. And for me, that's not a good argument. Suzanne de Brunhoff get one point in Marx theory of money, and she says this is an étrange expression, a strange expression. That is, when money has its own value, why? How? Marx is explicit in German through a barter. It is not a monetary exchange when gold enter the circuit. Enter to barter. I resist of having a monetary theory based on barter. Then I know a lot of Marxist philosophers would say, oh, but that was at the beginning, these changes along the way. For me, it's a kind of original sin. I will stop here, I think. How Bailey is related?
Crucial to understanding more.
Let me go back to some very provocative things. I don't tell you why and how in time, but since 2005, I ran a group within Capital. I already knew that there were problems with translations, paradoxically, because one phrase in English was translated better than Italian. And in general, I thought that. Well, my position now is that all translations in English of Marx are science fiction, even when they are good. Why? Because cultural translation is different. The same technical word is translated differently in different phrases. Because it seems that the translator said, oh, I got the meaning, and the meaning is this. So episodically, it is okay, but systematically, it is a problem. In any other, in French, in Italian, etc., I find an error. The error is recorded. So all the damn time that I have to quote from Marx in English, I have to go and check. There is a book that I would like to finish, that will never finish, of collecting my past articles. And there is an article on Sraffa and Marx, which I published, republished. There was an awful error in the first version, and probably the second. Then I changed it. Clearly, it was a slip. It was annoying. It has become bigger and bigger. So when I was revising it during the COVID, I realized two things. First, that it was possible to complete the epistolary, is the right term, the correspondence in 60, 61, 62 between Sraffa, Meek, John Eaton, etc., which is incomplete. And I have a chapter since 4 years that is there to be published. Doing that, the chapter and this other work, I realized that there were nice people in the early 70s, like Giorgio Gilibert, and Alessandro Roncaglia, who knew the relevance of the discussion of Marx, Riccardo, and Bailey, and the theory of surplus value. And of course, there is this thing about the standard commodity and the reaction of Marx against the argument of Riccardo of an invariable measure of value, etc. So I said, oh, well, I take the theory of surplus value 1 week and see what's in these 70 pages. In this case, it is not science fiction. There is only one translation, and it is really awful. I don't understand why, for example, just one example, Einheit. It means unity. Why you have to translate it as substance? You as an interpreter say unity is related, but the translation is pretty dead, and it's full of problems. Reading that, I realized that there is a key category, and I have always said even before that this was a key category that is unknown in the English debate, but mostly in any debate except 5 people, which is absolute value. Absolute value is identified with intrinsic value. And I did this in the past. Even though my argument was correct, but I did this. What is intrinsic value? It is the value in the commodity. There is use value. This as a commodity has a use value. And an intrinsic value. Marx says it has a valeur intrinsèque, question mark, and he says people may say not, but in fact, he is announcing that it has. My view is that actually for Marx, and I go philologically there, the intrinsic value in this commodity alone, individually, is a ghost. It does not exist. It is ethereal. That's the position, actually, of Michael Heinrich. But the argument of Marx is that this ghost has to take possession of a commodity. It must be embodied in a commodity, an excluded commodity. This excluded commodity is gold, and this embodiment makes money the value embodied. Parenthesis. Labor embodied does not exist in Marx. This is in the translation. Labor embodied for abstract labor is awful. It is wrong. Value is, sorry, money is value embodied. And this embodiment, says Marx, is absolute value because it is the soul, the ghost, which moves and goes to possess the body. This point one may question, what I am reading? A Gothic novel? Yes, you are reading a Gothic novel. More than that, it is also an entomological treatise, because the money as this embodiment is a chrysalis. And this chrysalis has to become a butterfly, that nice thing which is a butterfly. And Marx says, unfortunately, the chrysalis can become a butterfly, money producing money, only if actually it does not become a butterfly, it becomes a vampire. That's capital. I gave you capital before section 7. So it is also a vampire story. Dracula before that Dracula was written. The point about absolute value is exactly the point that I was raising, that for Marx, that is the argument according to which you link value, money, and labor, because the idea of Marx is that labor is what is behind the absolute value. But which value? The concrete labor, which is embodied in gold as money, because this is the concrete labor is embodied, goes into, the rest is contained. The argument by Marx is, look, this is money, this is the connection, value and money through labor. What happens if I cut away money as a commodity? I end up in the world of Michael Heinrich. Production is the concrete, circulation is the abstract, and the monetary. If there is a German Marxist who is against any non-monetary, he is Hans-Georg Bacher. And I think that Riker agrees with that. The two made a sustained criticism of Heinrich in 1995, between the first and the second edition, exactly for argument that I could relate to mine, because they come from the original Frankfurt story. Heinrich, no, Heinrich wants to cut away the Frankfurt link between Hegel and Marx and whatever. So Backhaus has this very strange idea on which I finish, that is, yes, any non-monetary, pre-monetary theory of value has to be rejected. And they are the neoclassic, the neo-Ricardian, and even most Marxists. Then in the introduction to the dialectic of the value-forwarded book, he says, but does this mean that labor before the circulation, etc., is should not be there? And he says, no, no, no. That is the most important thing. It is the ens realissimum, which moves all the dialectic. I agree with him, except that in my approach, that what for him is non-monetary, for me becomes monetary, because I have money before the universal equivalent. I have money in finance to production, which gives the imprinting also to the abstract laboring process, like in Rubin. That is my point. So I do not have the two worlds as all the other. Bailey is exactly the one who raised this problem. So you have Riccardo, which has the natural concept of labor. You have Bailey, who has only money without labor, and it is in this discussion that Marx goes almost to say that Bailey is right, except that he does not understand this process of abstraction and the absolute, etc. So you end in a world which is very theological, according to which absolute is the separation, linking together two things, so it is relative. Now you should ask, but then you should give me 15 minutes that we don't have. And now, how you go out from all this, because we are nowhere left. And remember that I said in Marx, actually, there are two arguments in which he relates labor and value. The second argument for me is in the second paragraph of chapter 7, the process of valorization. First, a terminological issue. Everybody knows that for Marx, even a child, there is a distinction between labor power and living labor. But there is a third notion, which is lebendige Arbeitskraft. Not Arbeitskraft, labor power. Not lebendige Arbeit, living labor, but lebendige Arbeitskraft. Living labor. What is it? Human beings regarded as the bearers of labor power. So yes, one can say, oh, it is reality, it is labor power. And in most translations, when this term occurs, it is badly translated. It is not translated as living labor. For me, it is important because Marx is looking at a very special social reality. It is a reality in the bourgeois world, in which human beings going to sell their labor power to the capitalists are free and equal. So this is what one could say is a BS argument. They are not free. And yet they are free and equal. This creates a completely new world, as Lukács in 1923 explicitly saw. The capitalists buy labor power from whom? These human beings. Take these human beings into the factory or whatever to extract living labor. So who is that sell the labor power, the living labor power, the workers. Who is that actually work? The living labor power. But they are free and equal, and capital must extract this living labor as a fluid only in production, as a contested, what is the term of the sociologist? Contested terrain. Etienne Balibar speaks of class struggle in production. I use the chapter 7 argument in the second section, in which Marx says, oh, the capitalist buys the human beings' labor power. It has a necessary labor. Then it extracts living labor and extract the same amount of living labor as necessary labor. There is no profit ever. Then it starts a very funny section of the chapter in which the capitalists say, oh, but how is this possible? I was abstaining from consumption. I was recognizing this. I was recognizing that. And then Marx said, but it was all for fun, because the capitalist knew that he could extract more living labor. So the argument is the prolongation of living labor over necessary labor. You go to the literature, when they discuss the origin of surplus value, they reason like Raffa in production of commodities, like Rubin in his book, like Croce, and they take what is today. Let us imagine that all goes to workers, then there's no profit, the prices are there, then let us imagine that the wage goes down half, and you have profit. No, this argument is very different. It's the argument about the fact that, and this is literal from chapter 7, from the capital point of view, production is only one thing, the consumption of living labor power, which is not surplus labor. It is all the new value. So Duncan Foley, I think I say that, Duncan Foley is not right when he takes this as just a post. There is an argument. And this argument for me is that point of view of this extraction is socially problematic. The capitalist sequence has three problematic points. First, the financier will be convinced to give you money. Second, there will be the de Brunhoff problem, the exposed socialization, but in the between, there is this thing. Then one says, oh, but where is this? We don't see this all the time. We see that sometimes. Yes, of course, because there is the organization of labor, because there are the techniques, because there is ideology, because there is all that. And in my view, capitalists and politicians very well know that this is a problem. So they don't take this as something. So in front of Mikkel, I would say this argument as exploitation, not as something which has always been there before capitalism. No. This is a specific social notion of exploitation. And it is not different from social domination. You cannot divide, Marx, social domination and exploitation in my meaning. This is by Marx. So I'm not refining the argument so much, but I would say that in my view, the absolute value is actually the money dimension of the new value added in the thing. That's the absolute value which is originated by this process. If you go that way, there is no transformation problem, or reason similar to Foley, because anyhow there is one big problem which would divide, and we discussed with Duncan 20 years ago. I would take the real wage as new interpretation, does not take the wage as given in real. And here again, I should have to take 3 minutes because their argument is, look, workers have money wage. They can spend the money wage in the commodities they wish. So how can you know what is the labor content of that money wage. So it is better to do as we do, to define the value of the money wage in labor commanded terms. But I reason in circuitous terms. I begin from the macro. And from the macro, I would say, again, the heterodox tradition, including Kaleski, Keynes himself in some way, that the capitalist class unconsciously, but effectively, through the autonomous demand, especially investment, but not only, are able to say, to take a part of the pie, and the rest of the pie goes to the workers. And this, section 7, is perfectly in labor value terms. Then the further question is, and the price dimension? Yes, it's a problem. The problem is that in the price dimension, in my view, since they go from the first to the third book, and not three to the third, from the third, what I had that new value is redistributed in labor commanded in a way according to which the surplus labor seems to be higher or lesser according to the price move. I said, this is absurd, because workers, they get necessary labor in labor and budget terms as a class. Labor in labor and budget terms. So that's okay. I'm finishing. The only thing that that is happening is that prices, individual prices, the prices at the industry level, matters not for the workers in the period, but for the firms, or if you wish, for the industries. So they tell you how much of that labor pool is taken from one industry relatively to another. And you have some phrases of Graziani, does not say that, but could be read in this way. Who saw these things exactly like me, but use it as a critique or criticism to Marx, another guy who came from Germany to the new school, Edward Heyman, who wrote a wonderful history of economic thought in 1942, 1945, and he says exactly this. What is happening is this, and he says, oh, this is a refutation of the labor theory of value. No, for me, it's not a refutation. Just say things that Marx didn't see, but from Backhaus, you absolutely understand it. And it is that this price dimension is a further mystification. It is a verrückte Formen. You are not able anymore, because don't even, if you follow Foley, you get that there is something there about exploitation, because you don't see that, but it is there in the genesis. But to understand this, you have to go behind the fetish and look at the source.